Some trips become unforgettable for the places you visit. Others stay with you for a very different reason. A quiet knock in the middle of the night. A driver who takes the wrong road. A stranger who lingers just a little too long outside your door. These three stories happened in different places to different people at different times, but they all share one thing. Nothing terrible actually happened, yet each moment came uncomfortably close. I have shared this story only a few times in my life. And every single time I tell it, I notice the same reaction. People begin relaxed, maybe even smiling, and then something in their expression slowly fades. I understand why. Even now, years later, I still think about that night more often than I would like. This happened in late winter of 2020. My husband, Ethan Walker, and I had just completed the exhausting process of buying our first house in Columbus, Ohio. Anyone who has gone through that knows how draining it can be. For months, we had been buried in paperwork, phone calls, inspections, negotiations, and unexpected expenses. By the time everything was finalized, we were worn down in every possible way, emotionally, mentally, and financially. Before we even began unpacking our moving boxes, we decided we needed a short escape. Not something fancy, just somewhere quiet where nothing required decisions. Somewhere we could breathe for a few days. Ethan found a rental listing online, a small wooden cabin located deep in the mountains of western Wyoming, far from any towns or highways. The photos showed wide panoramic windows facing endless snowy ridges that looked almost unreal, as if the mountains had been painted directly onto the horizon. The description emphasized privacy. No neighboring cabins, no nearby houses, just wilderness. The price was surprisingly low for a place that looked that good. I remember pausing with my finger over the booking button, thinking there had to be some reason it was so cheap. But we were exhausted. The dates were available, and honestly, we were too tired to question it for long. The drive from the airport took nearly 7 hours. The first part was normal highway travel, but the last stretch turned into narrow, rural roads, and eventually into what barely qualified as a road at all. 2 frozen tire paths cutting through snow-covered ground. Our rental vehicle bounced and rattled the entire time, and the navigation signal disappeared completely during the final hour. By the time we reached the cabin, the sky had already begun to darken. Winter sunsets come early in that region, and the mountains seemed to swallow the remaining daylight quickly. The cabin looked exactly like the listing photos. Not just similar, identical. Same angles, same lighting, even the same shadows. For a moment, it felt less like arriving somewhere new and more like stepping into a still image we had already seen. Ethan carried our bags inside while I unlocked the door. The key resisted slightly before turning, and when the door finally opened, a faint, stale smell drifted out. Not unpleasant, just old, like a place that had been closed up for a long time without fresh air moving through it. The heating system was running, though, and a small, handwritten note sat on the kitchen counter. Welcome. Firewood is stacked beside the porch. Mobile reception is unreliable, but the landline is available if needed. Enjoy your stay. Mounted on the wall nearby was an old rotary telephone, the kind I had not seen in years. We unpacked, opened a bottle of wine, and sat near the fireplace. Outside the enormous windows, the snow-covered mountains stood perfectly still, silent in a way that felt almost artificial, like scenery inside a display case. For the first time in months, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. Ethan fell asleep on the couch sometime around 10 that night. I stayed awake longer, watching the fire slowly collapse into glowing embers. The cabin was completely quiet. Then I heard it. 3 slow knocks on the front door. At first I thought I had imagined the sound, but a few seconds later the same 3 knocks came again. Steady, deliberate, heavy enough that there was no mistaking them. I set my glass down and stood up, suddenly aware of how isolated we were. Ethan was still asleep, breathing deeply, completely unaware. I walked toward the door, but stopped several feet away. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward and looked through the peephole. A man stood on the porch under the exterior light. He looked to be somewhere around 50 years old, wearing a dark winter jacket and a knit cap pulled low over his forehead. What unsettled me most was not his appearance, but the way he stood there, motionless, head slightly lowered, staring at the ground instead of at the door, as if he were simply waiting. I stepped back immediately. Ethan, wake up!" He sat upright almost instantly. "What happened?" "There is someone outside." That woke him fully. He stood and started toward the door, but I caught his arm. "Do not open it," I said. "Why?" "I do not know. Just, please do not." Before he could respond, the knocking came again, louder this time. Ethan called through the door, "Can we help you?" A man's voice answered from outside. "Sorry to bother you folks. My truck stopped working about a mile down the road. I saw your lights and was hoping I could use your phone." It sounded reasonable, completely ordinary, but something in my gut felt wrong in a way I could not explain. Ethan glanced at me. I shook my head. He called back, "We have a landline inside. If you tell me the number, I can make the call for you." There was a long pause. Then the man replied, "I would really appreciate it if you could just let me step inside for a minute. It is freezing out here." Ethan's hand moved toward the deadbolt. I grabbed his wrist. "No," I said firmly. "Please do not." He looked at me, confused, but he did not unlock the door. "I am sorry," he called out. "I will make the call for you, but we are not comfortable opening the door." Silence followed. Then the man spoke again, his voice noticeably flatter. "You sure about that?" Neither of us answered. A few seconds later, we heard footsteps moving slowly across the wooden porch. The sound stopped near the window, and then came a faint scraping noise, something brushing slowly across the glass from the outside. Not tapping, not knocking, just a slow, dragging motion. I felt my throat tighten. Ethan hurried to the kitchen, lifted the rotary phone from the wall, and dialed emergency services while I stood watching the dark yard. The dispatcher told him that a patrol unit was at least an hour away because of weather-related accidents on nearby roads. An hour felt like an eternity. The scraping sound stopped, and the footsteps moved again, this time along the side of the cabin toward the back. I ran to the bedroom window and saw the man in the moonlight, walking slowly around the perimeter of the building, moving at an unhurried, deliberate pace, as if he were studying something. After a few minutes, he disappeared from view. While we were still watching, I noticed something farther down the driveway. A pickup truck parked partially behind a line of trees, its headlights off. "Ethan, his truck is right there." It is not broken. We spent the rest of the night in the living room with every light on, the fireplace burning high, and a large kitchen knife resting on the coffee table. Every small creak of the cabin settling made us jump. Sometime before dawn, we heard an engine start. I looked out the window just in time to see dim red taillights moving slowly away down the long, snowy drive. A patrol officer arrived after sunrise. He walked the property, found boot prints circling the cabin, and followed them to the area where the truck had been parked. He told us there had been a few scattered reports over the past year of a man approaching isolated rentals in the region, always knocking, always asking to use a phone, never forcing entry. "You did the right thing by keeping the door locked," the officer told us. "What do you think he wanted?" I asked. He paused before answering. "It is hard to say." We packed our bags and left that same morning without waiting for checkout. Even now, I still think about how close Ethan came to unlocking that door. Because sometimes, the most disturbing part of a story is not what actually happens. It is how close something came to happening. This happened in the middle of summer, 2022, during a trip my best friend, Lauren Mitchell, had been planning for almost an entire year. It was meant to celebrate her 30th birthday, and she wanted something special, something that felt like a real escape. So she rented a large beach house in Sayulita, Mexico, directly along the shoreline, and invited 6 of us to spend the week there together. I almost did not go. I had just started a new job, and taking time off so early felt risky. I kept telling myself I should stay back and focus on work. But Lauren had a way of making things sound unforgettable. She kept saying, "You will regret missing this later." Eventually, she wore me down. I booked my flight and went. The house was stunning in the way vacation homes often look in photos, but rarely feel in real life. Smooth white walls, wide open living spaces with almost no separation between indoors and outdoors, long glass doors opening straight to the ocean air, and a pool that stretched toward the horizon so perfectly that, from certain angles, it looked like the water blended directly into the sea. It felt like we were staying inside a travel advertisement. The first 2 days passed exactly the way you would expect from a beach vacation. We woke early, did light stretching and yoga on the terrace while the sun came up, spent afternoons eating seafood and walking along the sand, and ended most evenings with drinks while the sky turned deep orange over the water. It was beautiful, relaxing, and just slightly exhausting at the same time, the way long sunny days usually are. On the 3rd night, Lauren decided she wanted to go into town for dinner. The rest of the group stayed behind. Too much sun, too many drinks, not enough energy. So it ended up being just the 2 of us. We called a rideshare and went to a restaurant she had been excited to try, an outdoor place filled with hanging lights, candles, and thick tropical plants growing along the edges of the seating area. Dinner lasted longer than planned. The food was excellent, we ordered more drinks than we intended, and by the time we finally requested a ride back to the house, it was already close to 11 at night. The app said the driver would arrive in about 7 minutes. We stepped outside and waited near the edge of the quiet street. Most nearby businesses had already closed, and the area was much darker than it had been earlier in the evening. Only a few scattered streetlights remained on. A white sedan pulled up and slowed to a stop in front of us. The driver rolled down the window and said Lauren's name. She checked her phone, confirmed the license plate matched the number in the app, and we both got in without thinking much about it. I sat behind the driver, and she took the seat behind the passenger side. The car smelled strongly of tropical air freshener, something coconut-like, and soft Spanish pop music played through the speakers at low volume. The driver said very little after we got in. He simply nodded once and pulled into the road, heading generally in the direction of the coastline where our rental house was located. About 5 minutes into the ride, Lauren leaned slightly forward in her seat. "Are we going the right way?" she asked casually. The driver looked at her through the rearview mirror. "Yes, faster route," he said. His English was clear enough, but something about his tone felt oddly flat, almost rehearsed. Lauren opened the map on her phone and studied it for a moment. "We are going in the right direction," she said quietly to me, "but this is not the route the app shows." Then she spoke again. "Could you take the coastal road instead, please?" "This faster," the driver repeated without turning around. She glanced back at me, and I saw the first small flicker of discomfort in her expression. I leaned forward slightly. "Hey, she asked if you could take the other route," I said. He met my eyes briefly in the mirror. His face remained completely neutral. "Faster this way," he said again, then returned his attention to the road. The music seemed louder now, or maybe it only felt that way because neither of us was speaking anymore. A few minutes later, the car turned onto a road I did not recognize. It was noticeably darker, narrower, with tall trees pressing in along both sides. There were no streetlights, no storefronts, and no other vehicles passing in either direction. "Where are we?" Lauren asked, her voice sharper this time. The driver did not answer. I pulled out my phone and opened the rideshare app. The vehicle icon was still there, but the route had clearly changed. We were no longer heading toward the coast, we were moving away from it. A heavy, sinking feeling settled in my stomach. "Stop the car," I said firmly. He continued driving. "Stop the car now," I repeated, louder. At that moment, Lauren's phone rang. She answered immediately. I could hear a man speaking quickly in Spanish on the other end. As she listened, the color slowly drained from her face. "It is the real driver," she whispered. "He says someone canceled his ride and took it." Every muscle in my body went cold. The vehicle began to slow, and for a moment I thought he might actually pull over. Instead, he turned onto an even smaller road, little more than a dirt path cutting through the trees. Lauren grabbed the door handle. Locked. "Unlock it," she said, her voice breaking slightly. The driver reached down, and we heard the distinct mechanical click of the child locks being engaged. In that moment, instinct took over. I screamed. Not actual words, just loud, continuous noise directly behind his head. Lauren joined in immediately, both of us shouting as loudly as we possibly could, filling the car with chaos. The driver slammed on the brakes. The car slid slightly in the dirt before stopping completely. He twisted around halfway in his seat, shouting angrily in Spanish, his face flushed and tense. Then headlights appeared behind us. Another vehicle was coming down the road. The driver saw it too. He muttered something sharply, hit the unlock button, and the doors released with a click. We did not hesitate. We jumped out of the car and ran toward the approaching headlights before he had time to react. The other vehicle stopped. Inside was an older American couple, both looking alarmed as we reached their window. "Are you okay? What happened?" the man asked. Behind us, the white sedan shifted into reverse, tires kicking up dust as it sped back the way it had come, disappearing into the darkness within seconds. Lauren was crying openly now. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. We explained everything, and the couple insisted on driving us back to the beach house themselves. They waited outside until we were safely inside and had locked every door and window. That night, we called the local police and filed a report. The officers told us that incidents involving fake rideshare drivers occasionally happened in tourist areas, especially late at night, when travelers were less cautious. Even now, whenever I step into a rideshare vehicle, I check the driver's face against the photo in the app more than once before closing the door. And sometimes, late at night, I still think about that narrow dirt road, about where we might have been taken if another car had not appeared at exactly the right moment. I try not to think about it for long. Some possibilities are better left unanswered. This last story is different from the others. Nothing dramatic happens, no one chases you, no loud confrontation. Nothing that would look frightening on camera. But it is the one experience that still comes back to me sometimes, in the middle of the night. The one that quietly unsettles me the most. It happened in the fall of 2023, during a solo trip I had been postponing for years. I had always wanted to travel alone across Europe, but there was always some excuse. Work schedules, money, timing, responsibilities. Eventually, I realized that if I kept waiting for the perfect moment, I might never go at all. So I booked the flights and planned the trip. Krakow, Poland was my third stop. I reserved a small historic hotel located in the older section of the city, the kind of place that had clearly been standing for more than a century. The building looked exactly like its age suggested. Exposed wooden ceiling beams, floors that creaked with every step, and tall, narrow windows that rattled faintly whenever the wind passed through the street outside. It was charming, atmospheric, and just slightly worn in a way that made you constantly aware of how many people had stayed there before you. I arrived late on a Friday evening after a long travel day. The woman working the front desk appeared to be somewhere in her 70s. She had sharp, attentive eyes and a polite but reserved smile. Instead of handing me a plastic key card, she placed a heavy brass key on the counter, attached to a thick metal tag. "Third floor, room 31. Breakfast from 7 until 10. The staircase leading upward was narrow and steep, the kind that makes every footstep echo softly in the stairwell. I climbed past the second floor and reached the third, where a long corridor stretched out under dim overhead lights. My room sat at the far end of that hallway. The corridor had a noticeable smell, old carpet, aged fabric, and something faintly sweet underneath it, almost like dried flowers that had been left in a closed drawer for too long. The room itself was simple. A small bed pushed against one wall, a wooden chair near the window, and a compact bathroom that looked like it had last been renovated sometime decades earlier. Nothing felt unusual. I placed my bag on the floor, brushed my teeth, and fell asleep almost immediately. Sometime during the night, I woke to the sound of knocking. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 soft knocks, evenly spaced. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but a few seconds later, the same 3 knocks came again. I sat up and checked my phone. 2:47 in the morning. Still half asleep, I got out of bed and walked toward the door. There was no peephole. I rested my hand on the handle. "Hello?" I called. No response. I stood there listening, and that was when I noticed something else. Someone was standing on the other side of the door. I could hear breathing, quiet, steady inhaling and exhaling, close enough that the sound seemed to press faintly through the wood itself. "Who is it?" I asked. Nothing. The breathing continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. A moment later, I heard slow footsteps moving away down the hallway, unhurried, deliberate. I did not open the door. The next night, the same thing happened. 2:47 in the morning, 3 soft knocks. This time I stayed in bed, listening. The breathing outside the door lasted longer, close to a full minute, before the footsteps slowly retreated down the corridor again. By the third night, I decided I wanted to see who it was. I set an alarm for 2:30 and stood near the door with my phone already in my hand, camera open, waiting. At exactly 2:47, the knocking came again. I waited until I heard the breathing, then opened the door quickly. The hallway was empty. I looked left, then right. The dim corridor stretched in both directions, every door closed, no sound of movement anywhere. Yet the faint floral scent that lingered in the hallway seemed stronger than before, almost concentrated around the entrance to my room. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and did not sleep at all that night. The next morning during breakfast, I approached the front desk and asked the woman whether anyone else was staying on the 3rd floor. She looked at me for a moment and said, "You are the only guest on that floor this week." I hesitated before answering. "Someone has been knocking on my door at night." Her expression did not change. "What time?" she asked. "Around 2:45, 3 nights now." She nodded slowly, as if I had just confirmed something she already knew. "Room 31, she said. It was not phrased as a question. "Yes," I replied. She folded her hands on the counter and spoke quietly. Many years ago, a woman stayed in that room while waiting for her husband to return from the war. He never came back. For years, she woke at the same hour each night, the time his letters used to arrive, and she would walk to the door to check. I felt a cold sensation move across my arms. She died in that room, 1956. I stared at her. "Why did you not tell me that when I checked in?" She gave a small shrug. "You did not ask. And she does not harm anyone. She only knocks." I checked out later that same day, even though I had already paid for the remaining nights. I moved to a newer hotel near the train station. Bright lights, plain furniture, no history at all. I slept deeply there, without interruptions. 2 weeks later, I was back home in Seattle, Washington, and I had mostly pushed the experience aside, filing it mentally under strange travel memories. Then, one night, I woke to the sound of knocking on my bedroom door. 3 soft knocks. I sat upright in the darkness, staring at the closed door. I lived alone. The apartment was locked. Everything was quiet. The knocking came again. I did not get up. I did not move. I simply sat there, frozen, watching the outline of the door until the first light of morning slowly filled the room. It has never happened again. But sometimes, late at night, when my apartment is silent and I am just about to fall asleep, I think I hear those same 3 soft knocks, and I cannot help wondering whether some things stay where they happen, or whether sometimes they decide to follow you home. Subscribe for more real horror stories. Like the video if you felt this fear too.